Hello, I'm Russell Michaels and welcome to CinePolitics, where we discuss the social and, of course, the political issues which have inspired all kinds of films and documentaries from all around the world. On today's programme, we're discussing the documentary In the Land of the Free, written and directed by Vadim Jean and narrated by Samuel L. Jackson. Herman Wallace, Albert Woodfox and Robert King have spent almost a century between them, locked in solitary confinement. Their cases were almost forgotten by society, but they have become known as the Angola Three. Once called the bloodiest prison in America, Angola is Louisiana's State Penitentiary. In the Land of the Free investigates the story of these extraordinary men who appear to have been targeted by the prison authorities for being politically active members of the Black Panther Party and because they fought against the inhumane conditions and brutality of the prison system. Herman and Albert were convicted for the murder of prison guard Brent Miller in 1972, but there was no physical evidence against them, and it's now known that the main eyewitness was bribed to testify against them. Robert King, the third Angola man, was kept in solitary for 29 years. His conviction was finally overturned in 2001. But incredibly, today, after 37 years, Herman and Albert are still locked in solitary confinement. And the question is, how can this still be happening today in the country that calls itself the Land of the Free? So, do the cases of the Angola Three reveal only injustice in America's past, or, with America now achieving the highest rate of incarcerations in the world, do they reveal a system that has become an industry that is out of control? Well, here to discuss In the Land of the Free are my guests, Owen James, a journalist who writes for The Guardian on prison issues, and Tim Roby, film critic for The Daily Telegraph. Very warm welcome to the programme. To start with you, Tim, straight away, how do Herman, Albert and Robert's stories kind of collide so that they finally, after all these years, attain national focus and interest?
Well, it's done in a very piecemeal way because, of course, Robert is released and immediately puts all of his efforts into trying to get his fellow inmates the release that they deserve. So he's a very central figure in it, actually. But there are also a lot of other people working very hard, lawyers and family members, to secure their release and to expose the kind of huge pyramid of kind of inconsistencies and straightforward lies that have led to these convictions.
Briefly, it's a 37-year period. Just briefly, how does the director kind of handle that in purely as a time frame? It's
a challenge, yes, and it's done a lot through archive footage from the 70s, for instance, the Black Panther footage from back then. And we follow Robert in person on his sort of journey, but only the more recent part of it, of course. And in for Herman, Albert, we have no in-person interviews with them at all because they're, of course, still behind bars.
Well, let's get back to them in a moment. Robert is now 67 years old. He's been released. But Owen, how do we get any sense of how Herman and Albert are innocent or guilty of anything, any crime, from the beginning?
Well, they were obviously, they seem to have emerged from a neighbourhood that was crime-ridden, a very poor sort of background in New Orleans. And they were from a group of people who were targeted regularly by the police. I mean, these were poor kids who didn't have any facilities. For example, they would stand at the gates of schools where well-to-do white kids were going to, or reasonably well-to-do white kids were going, and not have access to the facilities. And if they were caught inside these playgrounds playing in the facilities, they were picked up by the police and arrested and maybe, you know, imprisoned and placed in cells by the police.
And it seems that the white police forces had a policy of kind of clearing some of the crimes off the books by just picking up black guys and saying, you're guilty of this range of crime.
That's not to say that they're all sort of angels, but this was a way of life that drew them, I think. My feeling is that they were drawn into this criminal culture through that targeting by the police, through that social situation.
Well, Tim, how did their lives mirror the black civil rights struggle itself in America and the movement that was born out of it?
In a way, they mirror it in an extremely concentrated and intense way, because the second that they're put behind those bars in Angola, which was, of course, a prison founded on the grounds of a former slave plantation.
Yes.
You know, the situation they're in there is such a kind of a crucible of you know, of oppression and racism, that their own emerging political beliefs can only help but be heightened by what's going on there. So it's very much like, you know, they're really being inflamed by that situation.
Is there a sense also that civil rights struggle is still going on today, because it seems that there could be lots of people in prison from decades ago who were falsely imprisoned as young black youths? That's
quite right. It's pointed out at the end of the film that though these are almost sort of record-breaking lengths of sentence in isolation, there are many other inmates who have been in isolation for sort of 15, 20 years, and what's to say that in 20 years' time they won't have racked up the same number of years?
If they survive.
Yeah.
Owen, what level of psychological endurance have these guys had in their systems just to survive and keep their sanity?
Well, innocent or guilty.
And you have been in solitary confinement yourself?
I have. I was in prison for 20 years myself. I wasn't in solitary confinement for all that time, but my first year was in solitary confinement. I guess it was 23-hour bang-up in a London prison, and we were opened sort of 4 times a day for very brief periods to collect our meals and empty our toilet buckets and things like that. But it doesn't really compare to what these men have been through. And I was going to say that innocent or guilty, with the fact that these guys have held up emotionally and mentally, is sort of heroic. But the fact is, I mean, most people that understand any level of this case don't believe that they are guilty. So, which even, you know, in some extent, when I was in prison, I saw innocent people people who claimed to be innocent, who were cleared, you know, 10, 15 years down the line.
Right.
Some people I saw really struggle and really go under, but other people, their innocence was something that gave them strength.